Good morning. Good morning. Wow! I'm Bonnie Carey, and I'm your new bishop. A few weeks ago, I was driving up on I-75, coming back from a funeral of a beloved deacon of our diocese, Ken Resnick. And as I was driving, I turned to my colleague, Vicki Hess, who was with me, and I asked her, "Hey, do you ever get used to it? Do you ever get used to driving past caved-in, abandoned, ruined houses? Do you ever stop noticing them?" She said, "No. And I wondered, how could you? How could I ever stop noticing? And I'm still wondering. I mean, ask anyone and they will say, Detroit's on its way, it's making a comeback, it's restructured, it's out of bankruptcy, it's released from the state's financial oversight, new investments, new jobs, many more people moving to the city. And still, the gap between downtown and midtown and the neighborhoods, the gap between investment and abandonment, the gap between the suburbs and the city, the tech and the labor, the newly employed hipsters, and the unemployed historic residents. White and black, the gap remains. Mind the gap, they say, when riding the subway in London. What do we say here? What do we in the mainline Protestant churches, specifically the Episcopal Church, what do we say? And more to the point, what are we doing? What are we doing about the gaps? The massive chasm in our polarized, bifurcated country. What are we doing to create a spring of water, a way in this seemingly parched desert wilderness of our world? These gaps, these divides are not a 21st century American invention. Hear the words again of the prophet Isaiah from the 7th century before the time of Christ. The Hebrew people have been in exile. The people who have walked in darkness are now in the midst of seeing a great light. The world is turning and changing, and yet they are complaining. Why do we fast, O Lord, but you do not see? about us? And God, through the prophet Isaiah, replies to them, well, it's because you fast and then you quarrel and fight. You humble yourselves and then serve your own interests, and you oppress your workers. Seriously, says God through Isaiah, is this the fast I choose? For you to humble yourself and to lay down in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what I want from you? Or is not this the fast I choose, but to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to then break every yoke, to remove the yoke of oppression, and to satisfy the needs of the afflicted. And things are not so different now as they were some 2,700 years ago. Here we are, as Jennifer yesterday so aptly noted, with our world on fire, wondering, where is our God? Here we are, doing amazing worship and liturgy with some very nice outfits. And I wonder about that. I wonder about that gap. Those gaps between our prayers and our actions. Between my prayers and what I do. And I wonder, what if I, a woman who happens to be white, what if I begin openly to deal with the raft of emotions that I have when someone says, you, Bonnie A. Perry, have benefited from an unspoken, intrinsic, perhaps unconscious bias in our communities. You have participated in a system of white supremacy. I hear that, and I take a deep breath. I step back, I stand up straight, and I say, are you really sure a system like that exists? Because I haven't seen it. I actually don't believe that. In all seriousness, this is quite possibly one of those things that the off-the-wall boomer liberals have made up. That is my first response, and there's at least one person in this room who's heard me give it. My second response is this: well, even if it does exist, I immediately and I indignantly want to cry, not me! Not me! I'm one of the good guys! But what if I were to really start looking and watching and analyzing, and what if I risked doing some deep listening with friends and colleagues who happen to have more melon in their skin, and that their skins are darker? our African American sisters and brothers, our Latinx sisters and brothers. And what if I began to hear the truth of their lives? Stories from one of yesterday's soloists. She said, I am routinely followed when I enter a store to see if I am going to shoplift. Or from a clergy colleague of color in our diocese, I am routinely ignored by my white colleagues. And another clergy person. I grew up here in the suburbs of Detroit, and I know which majority white suburbs that I will always drive at least 5 miles below the speed limit, so I do not get pulled over, because I do not look like I belong. When I start to get over myself and my protesting, and started and continued to listening, it is then that I begin to see and mind the gaps of our world. It is then that I begin slowly to learn that right now in our country, it is the color of my skin and not the content of my character upon which I am first judged in our world. And when that light began to dawn on me, it took my breath away to know that in my bones I had been buoyed by this bias without even knowing. I had been swimming with a float I didn't even know I owned. And I wanted to say, it's not my fault because I didn't know. But now I do. And now, over time, bit by bit, I too am coming to see the divide. So what if we took our resources of affluence and power and creativity and joined them with our very real experiences of racism and creativity and poverty to be the bridges of relationship needed to cross the gaps and chasms of inequity in this city and in every community in the southeast corner of this amazing peninsula? What if? And I'm wondering, what if we were to embody the prophet Isaiah's words and to not only loose the bonds of injustice, but to take that yoke, that harness, and to break it, and to smash it, and systematically undo and dismantle those systems so that never again we are separated one from another. And when you do those things, then says the prophet Isaiah, your light shall break forth like the dawn. Your healing will spring up. You shall call the Lord. You will cry out, and the Lord will say, here I am. And then your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt, and you shall raise up the foundation of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to live in. On that day. What if we, beginning to move toward that day, on this day, that now all of us together, now, he'll come back. Now, for him, for us, for God. What if now we were to do that? Amen.